Look at this painting. Millions walk past it every year, but almost nobody sees what's actually hidden here. But this isn't just art. It's a secret that could have gotten Michelangelo killed. Behind God, right there in that flowing red cloak, there's something the Catholic Church never wanted you to notice. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Sistine Chapel, Vatican City. Every year, more than 5 million people walk through these doors, crane their necks upward, and stare at what many call the greatest artwork ever created. But here's what nobody tells you. Michelangelo didn't just paint religious scenes up there. He painted something far more dangerous. Something that stayed hidden for almost 500 years. And what I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about this masterpiece. In 1990, a doctor from Indiana made a discovery that shocked the art world. His name was Frank Meshberger, and he was flipping through an art book when something caught his eye. He looked at the creation of Adam, the most famous panel on the entire ceiling, and he saw something impossible. The red cloak surrounding God, the angels, the entire composition, it wasn't just decoration. It was an exact, perfectly accurate drawing of a human brain. Not close. Not similar. Exact. Every fold, every curve, every anatomical detail matched perfectly with the cross-section of a real brain. The frontal lobe, the brainstem, the pituitary gland, even the optic chiasm. All hidden in plain sight, painted directly above the altar of the Pope's private chapel. But this is just the beginning. Wait until you see what else he hid. Before we go deeper, you need to understand something. This wasn't an accident. Michelangelo knew exactly what he was doing. And the reason why takes us back to 1492, when a 17-year-old boy walked into a monastery in Florence carrying a secret that could destroy his entire career. Young Michelangelo had just lost his mentor, Lorenzo de' Medici. He was talented but broke. He needed a place to stay, and the prior of Santo Spirito Monastery offered him something extraordinary. A room, privacy, and access to something illegal. Dead bodies. At night, while everyone slept, Michelangelo would sneak into the mortuary attached to the monastery. He would light a single candle, pull back the sheet, and begin cutting, dissecting, studying, learning the secrets hidden beneath human skin. This wasn't just curiosity. This was obsession. Michelangelo believed that to create perfect art, he needed to understand perfect anatomy. And the only way to do that was to see it firsthand, to touch it, to memorize every muscle, every bone, every vein. But there was a massive problem. The Catholic Church had banned human dissection. They called it desecration of the dead, a sin against God. If anyone discovered what Michelangelo was doing, he would lose everything. His career, his reputation, maybe even his life. So he made a deal. He carved a beautiful wooden crucifix for the church altar, detailed, perfect, moving, and in exchange, the prior looked the other way while Michelangelo spent night after night cutting open corpses in secret. His assistant later wrote that Michelangelo dissected so many bodies that he knew more about human anatomy than most professional doctors of his time. He studied every animal he could find. Dogs, horses, birds. He created molds of muscles in different positions. He drew sketches of organs. He mapped veins and nerves with scientific precision. He became a master of something the world didn't even know he was studying. And then, 16 years later, Pope Julius II gave him the most important commission of his life. Paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo didn't want the job, he hated it. He considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. He was working on what he thought would be his masterpiece, the tomb of Julius II, a monument that would immortalize both of them. But you don't say no to a pope. Especially not Julius, a man known for his violent temper and absolute power. So in 1508, at 33 years old, Michelangelo began climbing the scaffolding that would become his prison for the next 4 years. 60 feet above the ground, lying on his back. Paint dripping into his eyes. His neck cramping so badly he couldn't look down for weeks. His hands shaking from exhaustion. He barely slept. He barely ate. He worked alone, refusing assistance because he trusted no one with his vision. He painted scenes from Genesis. The creation of the world, the separation of light from darkness, the creation of Adam, the great flood, and hidden within every scene, invisible to everyone who looked up, he embedded his secret knowledge. The anatomy he had studied for years in those dark mortuaries. The structures he had memorized by candlelight. The organs he had held in his own hands. But why? Why would someone risk everything to hide scientific knowledge in religious art? That's the question that haunts art historians to this day. And the answer is more shocking than the hidden images themselves. Keep watching, because what comes next will blow your mind. The creation of Adam wasn't the only place he hid anatomy. In fact, researchers now believe he scattered anatomical images across the entire ceiling. And each one carried a message that could have destroyed him. Look at the scene called Separation of Light from Darkness. It's one of the last panels he painted, right above the altar. God is shown from an unusual angle, his head thrown back, his neck exposed. And for centuries, art critics couldn't understand why. Why would the greatest sculptor in history, a man who understood human anatomy better than anyone alive, paint God's neck so strangely? It looks lumpy, awkward, almost deformed. The lighting is wrong too. Every other figure in the chapel is lit from the left. But God's neck is lit straight on, like a spotlight. Like Michelangelo wanted you to see it. But nobody did? Not for almost 500 years. Then in 2010, two neurosurgeons published a paper that changed everything. Ian Sook and Rafael Tamargo from Johns Hopkins University showed that if you overlay God's neck with an image of the human brain viewed from below, the lines match perfectly. That lumpy, distorted neck isn't a mistake, it's a brainstem. The spinal cord, the optic nerves, the medulla, all painted with such precision that modern doctors were stunned. And there's more. The fold of fabric running up God's robe, the part that looks strangely bunched and unnatural. That's the spinal cord climbing up to connect with the brain hidden in God's neck. The way his beard curls? Those aren't random artistic choices. They're highlighting the anatomical structures beneath. Every detail was intentional. Every line had meaning. Michelangelo didn't just hide one anatomical image. He scattered them across the entire ceiling. In the panel showing the separation of land and water, researchers found what looks like a perfectly rendered kidney in God's cloak. This makes sense. Michelangelo suffered from kidney stones his entire life. He knew that organ intimately, not just from dissection but from his own pain. In the creation of Eve, God's cloak drapes in a way that matches the structure of a human lung. In another panel, angels surround God in positions that mirror the internal organs of the abdomen. And in the famous image showing God creating the sun and moon, if you look at the left side where God is shown from behind, some researchers believe the composition represents the brain viewed from below. The folds of his robe, the positioning of the angels, everything aligns with neurological structures. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember that brain in the creation of Adam? Some researchers believe it's not just a brain. They argue that the entire composition hides an even bigger secret. In 2015, a team of Italian doctors published a study showing that when you overlay the red cloak with an anatomical drawing of a postpartum uterus, they match almost perfectly. The folds of the fabric correspond to the folds of uterine tissue after childbirth. That green scarf flowing out behind God? A newly cut umbilical cord. Those angels surrounding him? They form the shape of a placenta. If this interpretation is correct, Michelangelo wasn't just saying God gave Adam intelligence. He was saying God gave birth to humanity. That creation itself is an act of birth, not divine magic. This elevated the role of women in creation, something the male-dominated church absolutely did not want to discuss. Women were supposed to be subordinate, secondary, created from Adam's rib as an afterthought. But Michelangelo's image suggests something radically different. That feminine creative power, the power to give birth, is divine. That God himself embodies it. And look at this. In the creation of Adam, look carefully at Adam's left side, right below his ribs. There's an extra outline there. An extra rib, barely visible unless you're looking for it. Researchers discovered this in 2019. Why would Michelangelo paint an additional rib on Adam's torso? Because according to the Bible, God took one of Adam's ribs to create Eve, but Michelangelo was suggesting something the church didn't want to hear. That Adam and Eve were created together, side by side, as equals. Not Eve as an afterthought created from Adam's body, but both of them formed at the same moment, both equally important, both equally divine. This directly contradicted Catholic teaching. The Church taught that women were inferior, that they were responsible for original sin, that they needed to submit to male authority. But here was Michelangelo, painting a different story right above the Pope's head. A story where women weren't lesser, where birth and creation were sacred, where equality was divine. And he knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't stop himself. Because Michelangelo believed in something that terrified the Church. Something radical. Something that could get him killed. He believed that the divine spark God gave to humanity wasn't just life. It was intelligence, consciousness, the human mind. The ability to think, to reason, to question, to create. Look closely at the creation of Adam again. God's hand reaches toward Adam through the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for creativity, decision-making, and everything that makes us human. God isn't just giving Adam life. He's giving him the ability to think, to reason, to observe the world and understand it without needing priests to explain it. This was heresy, pure, absolute heresy. The Church taught that humans should accept doctrine without question, that faith came through obedience to religious authority, that the Pope and the priests were the only path to God. But Michelangelo was painting a different message. He was saying that God gave us brains to use them. That intelligence and observation lead directly to divine truth. That we don't need the Church as an intermediary, and he wasn't alone. Leonardo da Vinci was doing the same thing. These artists were part of a secret movement, a group of thinkers who believed that observation and study could reveal truths that organized religion wanted to suppress. Michelangelo attended a humanist academy in Florence when he was young, a place where students studied anatomy, mathematics, philosophy, and science, where they dissected cadavers together, where they debated radical ideas about the nature of God and humanity. They learned to hide their knowledge in symbols and art that the Church couldn't easily censor, because you can destroy a book. You can burn a scientist. But how do you destroy a painting on the ceiling of the Pope's own chapel? How do you erase something that's already become famous? Something that millions of people have seen? You can't, and Michelangelo knew it. By the time anyone figured out what he'd done, it would be too late. The images would be immortalized. His message would survive. And for almost 500 years it worked. Nobody noticed. Until a doctor in Indiana picked up an art book and saw what had been hidden all along. But Michelangelo's rebellion didn't stop at the ceiling. 23 years later, in 1535, Pope Paul III commissioned him to paint one more fresco in the Sistine Chapel. This time on the altar wall, the Last Judgment. A massive depiction of the second coming of Christ and the final judgment of all humanity. And this time, Michelangelo didn't bother hiding his message. This time, he made it obvious. The Last Judgment shows Jesus at the center, surrounded by hundreds of nude figures, souls rising to heaven, souls falling to hell. And every single body is anatomically perfect, muscular, powerful, beautiful, celebrating the human form in all its glory. More than 300 figures, almost all of them completely naked. Men, women, angels, all nude. All unashamed. The Church was furious. Absolutely furious. The Pope's master of ceremonies, a man named Biagio da Cesena, saw the painting before it was finished and declared it pornographic. He said it belonged in a brothel, not a chapel. That nude bodies had no place in sacred art. That it was most disgraceful that in so sacred a place there should have been depicted all those nude figures, exposing themselves so shamefully. He said the painting was more suitable for public baths and taverns than the Pope's private chapel. Michelangelo's response? Legendary. Absolutely legendary. He painted Biagio into the fresco, right there in hell, being judged by Minos, the guardian of the underworld, with donkey ears to show his foolishness, and a snake wrapped around his body, biting him in the genitals. The most painful, humiliating punishment Michelangelo could imagine. When Biagio complained to the Pope, furious that his face was now immortalized in hell for all eternity, the Pope reportedly laughed and said, "I have power in heaven and on earth, but my authority doesn't extend to hell. You'll have to stay there." The portrait remained. And today, 500 years later, Biagio da Cesena is still there, still in hell. Still being bitten by that snake. Forever. But the criticism didn't stop. Another critic, a writer named Pietro Aretino, attacked Michelangelo publicly. Aretino was famous for his sharp tongue and his ability to destroy reputations. He had written to Michelangelo before the Last Judgment was finished, offering advice on how the painting should look. Michelangelo ignored him, so Aretino turned vicious. He called Michelangelo godless, immoral. He accused him of being more concerned with showing off his artistic skill than expressing religious devotion. So Michelangelo painted him too, as Saint Bartholomew, the saint who was skinned alive for his faith, and the flayed skin hanging from Bartholomew's hand. Many art historians believe the agonized face on that skin is Michelangelo's own self-portrait, a commentary on how criticism felt like being flayed alive, like having your skin ripped off while you're still breathing. It's one of the most haunting images in all of art. Michelangelo, painting himself as a discarded skin, hanging limply in the hand of a saint, suspended between heaven and hell. Neither saved nor damned, just empty, just waiting. Some scholars believe this represents Michelangelo's fear for his own soul. His worry that his pride, his genius, his refusal to submit might condemn him. Others see it differently. They see it as defiance. As Michelangelo saying, you can strip away my flesh, you can attack my work, you can try to destroy me, but the art remains. The message remains. The truth remains. And nothing you do can erase it. But by 1564, the world had changed. The Protestant Reformation had split Christianity apart. The Catholic Church was fighting to maintain control. The Council of Trent had issued strict new rules about religious art. No more nudity. No more controversial imagery. Everything had to be modest, obedient, conservative. Everything had to reinforce church authority, not question it. Michelangelo died that year at 88 years old. And the year after his death, Pope Pius IV ordered an artist named Daniel de Volterra to cover up the nudity in the Last Judgment. Loincloths, drapery, scarves strategically placed to hide what Michelangelo had celebrated. The human body, the divine form, the sacred beauty of creation itself. Da Volterra didn't want to do it. He was one of Michelangelo's closest followers. He understood what the nudity meant, what it represented. But he was told that if he refused, the entire fresco would be destroyed. Scraped off the wall, lost forever, so he agreed. And for this act of reluctant censorship, other artists nicknamed him Il Brigatone, the breeches maker, the man who put pants on Michelangelo's naked saints. For centuries, those added clothes remained, layer after layer of modesty painted over rebellion. When the Sistine Chapel was restored in the 1990s, many people expected them to be removed. Let Michelangelo's original vision shine through. But the Vatican decided to keep some of them, not all but some, as historical evidence of censorship, as a reminder of what happens when authority tries to control art, when power tries to suppress truth. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. Before the censorship happened, a different artist named Marcello Venusti created a perfect copy of The Last Judgment in 1549. He had no idea his copy would become the only surviving record of what Michelangelo's masterpiece looked like before it was altered, before the church painted over the bodies, before the message was hidden again. Today, that copy hangs in a museum in Naples. And when you compare it to the censored version in the Sistine Chapel, you see exactly what was changed. Saint Catherine, originally completely nude. Saint Blaise turned toward her in a position the church found scandalous. Dozens of other figures that were later covered, hidden, erased. All because the church was terrified of what Michelangelo was saying. And what was he saying? Why did he hide a brain in the creation of Adam? Why did he risk everything to embed anatomy throughout the Sistine Chapel? Why did he paint 300 nude figures knowing it would cause outrage? Because he believed something that the church couldn't tolerate. He believed that humans don't need an intermediary to reach God. That intelligence, observation, and reason lead directly to divine truth. That the human body isn't shameful but sacred. That the brain God gave us is meant to be used, not suppressed. That questions are holy. That curiosity is divine. That seeking knowledge is an act of worship. And he proved it by hiding his message in the one place nobody could destroy it. On the ceiling of the Pope's own chapel. Right above the altar where Mass was celebrated. Where cardinals gathered to elect new popes, where the most powerful men in Christianity stood every single day, looking up at images they didn't understand, images that contradicted everything they taught. For 500 years, Those men stood beneath a brain, beneath a message about human intelligence and divine consciousness, and they never saw it. They never understood what Michelangelo had done, that he had turned their own chapel into a monument to everything they opposed, to scientific inquiry, to anatomical study, to the radical idea that humans are capable of understanding the universe without permission from priests. The Sistine Chapel is more than art. It's a time capsule of forbidden knowledge. A rebellion painted in plain sight. A masterpiece that celebrates everything the church tried to control: the human body, scientific inquiry, women's creative power, intellectual freedom, the divine spark of human consciousness. Michelangelo spent 4 years on his back, in pain, exhausted, isolated, painting secrets that would outlive everyone who tried to silence him. And today, 500 years later, we're finally beginning to see what he really created. Not just religious scenes, not just beautiful paintings, but a coded message about who we are and what we're capable of. The next time you look at the creation of Adam, don't just see God giving life to man. See a brain. See consciousness. See intelligence. See a message about the sacred nature of human thought. And remember that the artist who painted it spent nights cutting open corpses by candlelight, memorizing anatomy that was forbidden to know, studying the human form with a dedication that bordered on religious devotion. Because to Michelangelo, understanding anatomy was understanding God. Seeing how the body worked was seeing divine design. Mapping the brain was mapping consciousness itself. And painting those structures in the Sistine Chapel was his way of saying that science and religion are enemies. That observation and faith aren't opposed. That using your brain to understand the world is the most sacred thing a human can do. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about hidden images. It's about a man who refused to be silenced, who embedded truth in art because art outlasts censorship, who risked his life and his legacy to leave a message that would take 500 years to decode, a message that says, look closer, think deeper, question everything, use the mind God gave you. If this story amazed you, leave a like on this video. Subscribe, because tomorrow we're exploring another secrets even more shocking than this. A place where the architecture itself hides messages, where the stones tell stories that contradict official history, where truth was literally built into the walls. And drop in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. Did you know about the hidden brain? What do you think Michelangelo would say if he could see us finally understanding his work? What other secrets do you think are still hidden in that ceiling, waiting to be found? Because that's the thing about great art. It doesn't just hang on a wall. It speaks across centuries. It hides truths that reveal themselves when the world is ready. It waits for the right moment, the right eyes, the right minds to see what was there all along. And sometimes the most forbidden details are the ones hiding in plain sight, painted by a genius who knew that truth is patient. That rebellion doesn't always look like rebellion. That the most powerful way to challenge authority is to create something so beautiful that destroying it becomes impossible. Michelangelo won. The church tried to control him, tried to censor him, tried to erase his message, but they failed. Because art outlasts power, beauty outlasts control, truth outlasts censorship. And 500 years later, we're standing here, finally seeing what he painted. Finally understanding what he meant, finally receiving the message he risked everything to send, that you are divine, that your mind is sacred, that seeking truth is holy, and that nobody, no matter how powerful, has the right to tell you to stop thinking, stop questioning, stop using the brain that God gave you to understand this incredible universe we live in. That's the forbidden detail in the Sistine Chapel. Not just a hidden brain, but a hidden message about human potential. About divine intelligence, about the sacred nature of curiosity itself, and about one artist's willingness to risk everything to make sure that message survived long enough for us to finally see it.